G'day everyone, this is Dean and thank you for dropping by to watch this video on editing landscape images. Now this video and this series of videos is all about why and what we do rather than how we do it. So I want to show you what I do, why I'm doing it and the effect that it's going to have on the image. Now I just want to clarify straight up that these are not Photoshop or Lightroom tutorials. I'm not teaching you how to use a brush or how to do a technique to do a certain thing. I'm teaching you and I want to show you what I do and why. So it's more about the why and not the how. Now, how this came about was I had a few of you reach out to me and you said, hey Dean, it'd be great if you could do some videos on editing landscape images and show us your insight into what you're actually doing and why you're doing it. So that's what these are all about. And look, it's a very common thing. I hear it on workshops where people say, you know, I've done all these courses on Photoshop and Lightroom and I know how to do everything, but I don't know what to do. So I open the image and I go, well, where do I start? You know, what am I supposed to be doing? Do I darken that area? Why do I darken that area? I don't know, I've got no idea. So this is a very common thing in people's photography journey. And I think it's a really important one that you have a really clear vision on what you're doing and why you're doing it. So that's what these videos are all about. I'm going to walk you through an edit from start to finish. I'm going to show you what I'm going to do, why I'm going to do it, and the effect that it's going to have on that image. And look, I can't do everything in one video because every image is obviously a little bit different and my approach is going to be different to that style of image. It all depends on the subject. So I'm going to do a few of these and I really encourage you guys to watch as many as you can if this sort of thing interests you. So enough chit chat, let's dive in and get started. Rightio, so we've got our image opened here. For anyone that wants to know, I'm using Photoshop CC. You can use any editing program, it doesn't matter at all. So the first thing we want to do is we want to look at our image and we want to identify all the different elements and the main subject. So as far as elements go, I talk a lot about this when I'm talking composition. So what I do is I'll break it down into the different elements and then that'll give us an idea of or the areas that we should actually be working on. So let me break this one down for you. The sky is a pretty important area in this. So that's one element. We've got this big hill over here on the right. Here's another element. We've got these two big foreground rock ledges here, so they're the third element, and then the fourth element is this cluster of rocks in the middle here with this this flow happening through here. So those are your main elements. And look, what I suggest you do is, if you're sort of learning and enjoying this process, then just write it down on a piece of paper. So write your elements down and then later on you can write next to it what effects you're going to apply to those different areas. So the next thing you want to do is you really want to clarify and make absolutely sure that you know what your subject is. What is this image all about? And you know, you guys should know because you took the image, so no one else knows. You know, and this is what governs how we edit and what we do to different areas. This is probably the key point and the most important point. So with this one, I can tell you that I was shooting down the Great Ocean Road. It was only a couple of weeks ago, so it's still very fresh in my mind. And there was this amazing cloud up over in this corner. So I sort of raced into this bay and got into this corner here. And it's only just this patch through the middle. If you look to the left, you can see it starts disappearing. So further to the left of this shot, the clouds were just normal, but there was this really intense cloud happening up in here. And you know, this will This is a raw file, so it's pretty flat, and you'll see the detail on here that'll come out when I edit it. So this is my main thing. I was sort of trying to make a picture around this. So I've got this fantastic cloud happening, and then I've built the composition underneath that. So I took quite a few shots this day. So this one is a landscape image. When I say landscape, I mean it's horizontal, not vertical. And so what I've done is, composition-wise, I've worked on this cluster of rocks in the middle as being sort of the key part. This is where I want the viewer to lead. So I want them to come into this image. They come to this cluster of rocks here with this nice flow happening through here, which was created by a slow exposure, a long exposure. And then they've got this really stormy, cloud up above it. So once you identify your subject and the core part of your image, then what happens is we apply more emphasis or more editing to those areas, and then the other areas like this hill, we back off and we don't do too much, and these big rocks in the foreground in this particular image, I wouldn't want to over edit these. You can imagine if this is my intent, is to keep the viewer kept in the middle of this image through here and up into these clouds, then if I edit the bilio out of this hill here and bring all the texture and detail and saturate the color, then the viewer's just going to go over to the hill, and we don't want that. We don't want them to go to the hill. We want them to stay in the middle here. So this is really critical that you identify these parts of your image before you even start your edit. Righto, so we have identified the key areas of this image. So let me run through before I start, and I'll just tell you what I'm going to do to each area. So the sky is pretty important, so I'm going to darken it down just a little bit, and then I'm going to add some contrast, and the contrast will bring out all the detail in through here. This hill, I'm going to lighten him up a little bit because I feel he's just a little bit dark. See how that hill is darker than these tones down in here? So I just want to lift it a little bit, not too much, just to bring a little bit of light into there. Now this main area through here, I want to lighten, especially this rock up. I want to lighten this rock up, and I'll play with the light a little bit through here by lightening it, and then I'll add some contrast into this area. And while we're here with that contrast, I'll just run it through across the ocean, because that will then actually bring some color out into it. It'll just darken and deepen that color. Most of my editing, I don't ever seem to be applying any color saturation, because when I add the contrast, it actually pumps up the color saturation. And with this particular image, just a bit of a sidetrack here, where this was shot with a polarizer. So even though it's a cloudy, overcast day, I always use a polarizer when I'm shooting seascapes, because what it does is it takes the reflection off the water, and then I've got this beautiful aqua color in here. And you'll see that come up when I do this edit. If I hadn't used a polarizer, this would have been more of a muddy sort of grey color, and see these beautiful aquas over in here? I wouldn't be picking up those colors. So very important to use a polarizer when you're shooting seascapes. Righto, and now these foreground rocks, I've got to be really careful that I don't over edit these. So I'm just going to lighten just the tops across here. I'm not going to lighten the whole rock. I'm going to just lighten little areas of it, which will just show you how it creates a little bit of depth. And there's a little bit of light just happening across here that I want to lighten up as well. So the main thing with my edit, what I want to do is I want to bring the emphasis to the middle of the image with this cluster of rocks, and I want to create some depth. So at the moment, there's not a lot of depth here. Everything is very flat. And this is very typical of a raw file, and it's pretty typical when you shoot in overcast conditions, because we don't have any sort of dark shadow areas or bright sunlit areas. And it's something to remember that a lot of people don't like flat light, but I actually love it. I think it's really nice and soft, and you can create something that's just nice and subtle. Now, when I've finished doing all of that, darkening and lighten these areas, adding my contrast, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a bit of a look and see where we're at and just see if there are any areas that need a little bit of a touch up, need a little bit more maybe darkening, or a bit, they might need to be lightened up a little bit more, or more contrast added. And then the final thing will be to add a vignette. So I'm going to add a vignette to this image, so that'll darken the outside of the image, and that will help us draw into the middle of the image. Now, because I'm going to add a vignette, and this is where you need a clear idea of what you're going to be doing to your edit. Because I'm going to add a vignette, I know that it's going to darken the outside areas, and especially these rocks down the bottom. So that's why I don't go in and darken those down now. I know that they're going to get darkened at the end. And the same with the sky. I don't want to overdo the sky along the top edges of the image, because I know that the vignette is going to darken that down a little bit. So you've sort of got to have a bit of an idea in your head of what you're going to do, and just knowing that things like, if you're going to add a vignette at the end, so that's going to darken bits, and just remembering that when we add contrast, that it will darken your darks and lighten your lights, because that's all contrast is. So it's just being aware of that as well. As far as a workflow goes, I'll just quickly go through that because it's pretty simple really, and it's really mainly to do with two things, and that's contrast and color saturation. So you don't ever add those first. You add those after you have done your basic darkening and lightening areas, because what happens is when we add contrast, as I've already said, it darkens your darks and lightens your lights, and it also increases the color saturation. So you wouldn't want to do a color saturation adjustment first and then add contrast later, because it's going to boost the color saturation. So always do those after you've done your selective editing on your darken and lighten areas, and you'll be fine. Right, so let's get started on this. I'm going to firstly just lighten this hill here up a little bit. So as I said, I'm in Photoshop. I'm going to use curve adjustment layers for all of these. And if you want to learn how to actually do this, how to use these curve adjustment layers, then just head over to my Photoshop Friday playlist, and I've got a heap of tutorials in there, and you can learn how to do that. So basically just explain what I'm doing, because I'm going to, most of these layers, most of these adjustments will be done by this. So what I'm doing is I've just turned that mask off. So I've used the curves adjustment layer where I've lightened the whole image. So what I'm doing is I'm just looking at the hill to sort of lighten it a little bit, so obviously more than what I want. And then with the adjustment layer, it throws in a mask for us. So the mask is white, which means we see everything. And then we just invert that mask by filling it with black, which is now everything is completely masked off. And then I use a white brush and I just brush in the effect. So this allows me to just do it nice and subtly without it being too harsh. So I just want to lighten that up, just get a little bit of light on those trees. Let's just turn that layer on and off. Yep, so that's all I need to do on that, just a little bit of lightening. That's all it needs. Okay, now we can probably use that same adjustment layer. I just want to come in on these rocks here and just across the tops. You see where the light's sort of hitting it. You sort of got light up here and some shaded areas. So I just want to bring the lights up a little bit. Just that guy in there. Okay, let's just go in and do this main rock. We'll do a bit in there. Let's make that brush a bit smaller. Yep, so we'll just turn it on and off so you can see. Yep, and just maybe a bit more in here. That's probably all that needs. And then this fellow along here, we'll just run across there. And this one here, I want to just touch on him as well. Okay, so let's just turn that on and off. So that's off. Yep. So see how that's made a big difference already just by lightening up those little areas. Right, let's do another layer, and we're going to darken that sky down. And again, I'll just brush that in. Go a bigger brush on this. This is a bit of a tricky one through here. Rightio. Now I'd probably spend a bit more time sort of doing that a bit neater, but for the sake of this exercise, I just keep it sort of fairly quick, just give you a rough idea. Okay, well that's pretty good there. Just turn that on and off. So you can see we've just darkened that down a bit. So that's on there, and that's off and on. Righto, now we are onto our contrast. So now I'm going to add contrast to the interesting areas. So let's do the sky first. You can see how it's really bringing those clouds out. And as I said, I'm going to run just straight across through here. A little bit in here, across our rocks. Now I don't want to put any in there, and I'm just going to, I'll just turn the opacity down a bit. I just want to put just a little bit on these guys here. Righto, let's have a look at that. Yep. So see that water? Have a look at that water when I turn that on and off. See how that's really brought the colour out? So that's why you don't need to add any colour saturation. Okay, so that's good. So the contrast is really important. As I said, add it to your important areas. I don't want any contrast in here because I want to sort of keep that soft and keep the focus in the middle here. And again, in this particular image, I don't want to put a lot of contrast into these foreground rocks because that will draw away from in here. Righto, so now what I do is I look at this image and I go, righto, I've only really got a vignette left to add. Is there anything else, any other areas that I want to sort of work on? You know, am I happy with everything I've done? And I'm pretty happy with everything. I think that hill's looking good. This rock here is still a little bit dark actually, so I really want to lighten him up a little bit more and just pay a bit more attention into here, and just a little bit more with the play of light on these rocks. And I just want to lighten these areas a little bit more, especially knowing that I'm going to darken with this vignette, so I don't sort of want to lose that. So let's just zoom in a little bit here. And let's just do another curves layer where we're going to lighten. So when you're working on a select area, it's good to actually like really hone in on that, you know, that part, because the beauty with doing it with these adjustment layers is that because you're brushing it in, you're only affecting that area. You're not doing the whole image, so it doesn't matter what's going on in the other parts of the image. Let's have a look at that. That looks pretty good. Let's just go a little bit more. Yeah, that looks good there. Right, mask that out, and now we're going to just brush that back in. And we'll just lift the opacity back up on my brush a little bit. And let's just turn him on and off. Yep, that's probably about, let's just leave that there for the time being. Let's just run over to this other rock and do the same thing to him. So this is the way you can really play with the light and just really subtly bring it in on different areas. Takes a bit of practice, but once you've done a few, you'll get the idea of it. And then I just want to hit these areas as well. The ones that I did before, so I just want to lighten those up a little bit. Righto, let's have a look at that. And let me just turn that layer on and off. Oh yeah, that's good. Have a look at that. So, wow, what a difference that has made. So that's just playing with light. So that's sort of, you do that at the end, and that's created some really nice depth now. It's like the light is, you know, just coming through. It was coming through from the right hand side here and just hitting the tops of these rocks. And that's just that last little step that's made a huge difference to this image. Okay, that's looking really good. Last thing is we're just going to do a vignette. So bear with me for 3 seconds to do that. And this is, I've got this on my Photoshop tutorials if you want to know how to do a vignette. So a vignette just darkens the outside of the image. And I've got this action set up so it overdoes it a bit, and then I just drop the opacity of the layer back. So the idea of a vignette is that it really draws the viewer in. So there again, that last little step, that's made a huge difference to that whole image. That sort of, it's nice, but that is so much better. It just really draws you in, doesn't it? Incredible. Such a simple thing. But just a word of warning with your vignettes, you've got to keep it nice and subtle. So you can see I've got the opacity, you know, down to sort of 50% there, and I had a lot of feathering on that. Righto, one last little look with that vignette, that's fine. Okay, and look, I reckon that is it. There is nothing else I really want to do to that other than fix this little halo up through here, which is not that hard. And I've actually got a tutorial on doing that as well. Let's have a look at a before and after. So I'll just go to the history here. So that's what we started with, and that's what we finished with. Just go through that again. So as you can see, it's fairly flat, and there's no direction, there's no depth. You're not sort of like drawn to anything. Whereas here, completely different. So, and I think it's not overdone. I think you know, over editing is something that we're all guilty of, and I think over editing is, it's sort of part of the learning process. We all go through it, but just learn to be subtle. And I think the biggest thing with editing, and this is something that no one seems to really teach you or talk about, is why we do it. And that's, you know, part of the reason of this series of videos is to teach you guys what you should be looking at, why you're doing it, and the effect that it's going to have. So you've got to have a bit of a plan before you start. So just a quick analysis of this image before I finish up. So my initial intent was to sort of keep the viewer centralized in the middle around that cluster of rocks with that movement of water coming through. You know, emphasize that nice stormy sky and not have the hill or the foreground rocks to sort of really overpower the image. And I think this works really well. It's you know, it's pretty much achieved what I set out to do. And this is what you guys need to do, is to get that bit of paper, write down you know, what you want to achieve with the image, the important parts. Always, you know, make sure that you know what your subject is and edit according to that. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope it's given you a bit of insight into what you should be doing when you edit your images. Now, as I say, I can't cover everything in one image because every picture is a little bit different. So have a look at my other ones, and hopefully that gives you an idea of what you guys should be doing when you edit your own images, and just a bit of a plan before you head in there as to what you should be doing. Now, if you have any questions at all, just leave one below in a comment and I will answer that for you as soon as possible. Thank you so much for watching. You guys have an awesome day, and I'll catch you in the next one. See ya.